For those of you joining us on the GBN Television Facebook page, the Grenada Broadcasting Network's YouTube channel, the website www.gbn.gd, those of you watching on GBN TV channel 7, 11 and 20, and good morning to the listeners of Classic 105.5, 105.9. This morning, the topic of the front burner, education. We have joining us via our Zoom platform is Minister of Education Emmalin Pierre, as well as Deputy Chief Education Officer in the Ministry with responsibility for exams. If I have it correct, with responsibility for exams, Mrs. Michelle Peters-George. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning. Good morning to you.
Good morning, and thank you once again for joining us. So let's get right into it, Minister. The hot topic as it relates to education these days, results coming out of CAPE and CXC, or CSEC, I should say, and what some students and parents, possibly educators, are calling discrepancies in the results. What's the latest coming out of the ministry and the decision by CXC to set up a committee actually to look at the concerns?
So, good morning, Blossom. Good morning to all of your viewers and listeners. Now, shortly after the results came out, of course, we heard a lot of noise at the regional level as it relates to discrepancies and concerns and drop in performances and so on. And of course, the very first thing I did was to call the head of the exam unit and the registrar locally to say that the results is being analyzed. I know it's pretty early, but have you seen anything at all that says that we have concerns, and you flag in anything that stands out to you? And the response 3 consecutive days was no. Right? The second thing is that when the preliminary assessment was done, it was very obvious that Grenada's improvement improved. Grenada improvement increased over the past 2 years. And in addition to that, schools that scored over 80% in the total average also increased. So moving from 8 to 17 schools falling into that category. So that preliminary assessment did not give us anything that we can join to say, well, Grenada is very concerned, we've seen a lot of discrepancies and so on. And from there, the next thing is really for the schools where individual teachers would now assess the results, look at the individual students, and then if they pick anything up now to make an official report and to raise that concern through the established means that has been there for many, many years. But the other thing, Blossom, from my initial inquiry with exams, is that this is not abnormal. This is not a first time. So in the past, we have had cases where a student come forward or a parent come forward or a school come forward to say that we would want to review this child's performance. We believe that child should have gotten a 1, and we noticed they got a grade 3, and we want CXC to review. And there is an established procedure, and it has been done for many students in the past. So the fact that we've only had up to yesterday 3 students requesting a review or raising a query, I believe at this stage what we want to do is to give the schools a little more time. And I believe whatever you do, you approach it in a way that is not just professional, but also you take a scientific approach to things like that. Have you seen anything in maths, in science, in whatever? And let the schools now make that kind of report to the Ministry of Education, to CXC, and then we take it from there. But at this stage, we're not in a position to say that generally speaking, we have a lot of issues, we have a lot of concern. There's nothing more than we've had in previous years.
But even with Grenada maybe faring better than other Caribbean countries, with the mass majority of islands or students in islands coming forward with concerns, do you think that it's just possibly Grenadian students are content with the results they've gotten, or is it that there's something deeper going on with the wider Caribbean raising those concerns with the grades?
Right. And when the comments started, I personally called CXC to ask some questions and to, make inquiries into a couple things, noting some of the concerns raised. I also spoke to head of exams as it relates to SBAs, because I noticed a lot of the concerns that I was picking up surrounded SBAs. And of course, she would get an opportunity to speak. So she would also speak from a quality assurance perspective. And listening to the feedback that I've had from the exams unit here, listening to what I heard from CXC, and listening to what I've heard from the region, I believe it is premature for Grenada to make a statement of concern. I'm not saying we would never have a statement of concern, but I'm saying at this stage, and remember, we have until October. Mrs. George would specify when she presents the actual date. But we have until sometime in October where schools can actually go on the system directly, enter the request for review, enter the queries. And I think at this stage, we give the schools an opportunity to assess, review, and then we make an informed decision that in school A, we have this concern. In school B, we have this concern. I think it's early days to make that kind of statement. Mind you, I empathize with those who have gone forward and make those statements. They have scientific evidence, I would imagine. They have scientific data, I imagine. But at this stage, we await the schools. If you notice, in most cases, the particular school would have made a statement, and we await feedback from our schools and our parents.
Mrs. George?
Hi, Blossom. Good morning to all viewers as well.
Sorry, Mrs. George, sorry. Just come a little bit to your right, a little bit. Just center into the device. There we go. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Good morning to you, Blossom, and to our viewers out there. I must first of all say congratulations to our students for their excellent performance this year, or improved performance, I should say, in the 2020 examination. We have definitely seen an improvement of 2.79% as compared to the other years, as compared to 2019. In terms of the discrepancies, of course, yearly you would find queries and reviews from schools, from students, from parents, whoever it may be, basically who may have a concern about the examination. And this is nothing new to the region. It is nothing new to Grenada. This year, we're hearing a lot of noise throughout the region, but then again, we cannot just use this one, we cannot just use various countries' episode to generalize for all countries throughout the region, because there are a few countries who are very much concerned, but I must let you know, not all countries have shown that red flag read the examination. So I think it's important that we assess based on the needs of particular countries and ensure that we make a decision that is based on the data that we have in front of us. And the data is clearly saying to us in Grenada that we do not have that sort of concern. It is saying basically that we have improved performances, and Minister outlined that we had a 2.76% improvement in performances compared to last year, moving from 74.54% to 77.3% this year. And let me just go one step further to say that in 2018, the pass rate was 70.58%. So it tells you here, when you compare to 2018, that we had an approximate 7% or so improvement in performance. Additionally, we have looked at various subject areas, and we have also seen an improvement in around 22 subject areas in 2020 compared to 2019 out of the 32 subject areas. And we have not seen, again, if you look at the data, you have not seen a decline that's so significant that it raises a red flag. The smallest, the largest percentage decline in performance that we have seen thus far is for the area of geography, with a 5.68% decline in performance. So normally, a red flag will be raised definitely if you see a significant decline in performance on the subject level as well as at the school level. And of course, if you have a significant increase in the number of queries and reviews from schools. But this year, I must say to you that we've had 3, I think this morning, another school call, but it's not yet official. There is another school that has complained for mathematics, but other than that, we have no vast or significant, substantial increase in our query or reviews for 2020.
So if I could just add
Sure.
unofficial communication with principals thus far. Generally speaking, I do not believe we've picked up anything major. And I'm saying unofficial because the official would be when you into the system and you request the review. So the unofficial feedback and review, generally speaking, principals are saying that they're not seeing anything major. Doesn't mean that there might not be a 1 or 2 requests coming forward, but the feedback generally seems to be that there isn't a major concern of discrepancy. And that is from speaking to more than 50% unofficially of the principals, but we have given them the space and time, drill down into the results, subject by subject, teacher by teacher, and then come forward with any major concerns that you have.
All right, so let's go a little into our local results. Like you said, we've seen an improvement from 2018 to 2020, an improvement in percentage passes. But 2020 was a different kettle of fish when it came to learning and teaching. And even under COVID circumstances, the students were able to do exceptionally well coming from the preliminary reports that I've seen. What would you say would account for the way that we've performed even under trying times?
So I would probably use the opportunity to give credit. Of course, let me start with our students for their resilience. Many persons were of the view that we should put this thing off for another year. I remember in the consultation with students, there were some students who were for and some who were against. And some were saying, how do you know? And I mean, they were very intelligent in their responses. Some said, how do you know that next year there wouldn't be something worse than COVID? And it was those comments coming from students themselves that helped to shape and inform our final decisions. And parents similarly. So I want to first recognize the resilience of our students and the extra mile many of them would have gone in terms of preparation for the exams. I want to recognize the contribution of all of our teachers who have gone out of the way to support these students and the work that they did with them. And of course, while we might not be able to say every single teacher went way out of the way, we know that many of them did, and I want to recognize the contribution of our teachers in that regard. Our principal, Blossom, for the leadership. Remember, the students were home from March. And the principals must have played a major role in the leadership and management of the process to bring them back. If you remember, Mrs. George, I kept asking a minimum, how much time do we need to bring them back to get them prepared? And I always remember her 6 weeks. Minister, if they have 6 weeks, we could do it, we could do it. And so the partnership, the teachers, the students, the parents, as you would know, there are parents who go out of the way as well for their children. And of course, we want to recognize them and commend them along with the other stakeholders and all of the officers, all of the opportunities that various stakeholders provided. Parents have expressed gratitude for the MSTAN, the questions, the practice papers, the app that we provided. So I think collectively, I want to say this, that if we work closer together, the support of the Grenada Union of Teachers, I believe if you look at it collectively, the work of staff at the Ministry of Education, I think it was a collective effort. And I really want to say a special thank you to our principals and teachers. Those 6 weeks would have also made a significant difference.
All right, let's take a quick break and then we're going to come back inside and continue the discussion. We're speaking with Ministry of Education post-exams and getting into the new school year that started a few weeks ago. We're going to get further into the discussion when we return. This is To The Point on GBN Classic. We'll be right back.
Reading is too hard. Reading school books is lame. I'd rather read about children like me and cool things. I can read, but sometimes I don't even know why I have to. It makes no sense.
Why can't we read about things we like?
Reading is the key to unlocking all learning and ensuring that children reach their potential. Here's what the children have to say.
Make reading fun.
Teach me how to read, but let me practice reading with things I like to read. Talk with me and read with me, at least for a short time every day.
Let me tell you my own stories.
Read, learn, grow. The children are the future. Help them read, learn, grow. So parents, you play a part.
This message is brought to you by the OECS USAID Early Learners Program, funded by United States Agency for International Development.
Get away from your daily stress with a Grenada vacation at the Coyaba Beach Resort. Coyaba is located on the world-famous Grand Anse Beach and boasts 5.5 acres of beautiful gardens. We offer excellent service, good food and drink, well-appointed rooms and friendly staff in a safe environment. Facilities include 2 restaurants, 2 bars, swimming pool, water sports, tennis, gym and body treatment rooms. Call 473-444-4129.
EC Polymer Notes, our new money.
Here's how you can detect genuine EC Polymer Notes. Feel. Polymer notes feel smoother than the material from which paper notes are made. Also, the front of each note has raised bumps at the top left-hand corner. These bumps form shapes that are familiar to you. Look for the clear window at the front and back of each note. This window allows you to see through the notes. If you hold the notes up to the light, you'll see the value of the note in an area of plain colored print. Tilt. A holographic foil is on the $100, $50, and $20. The images move and their colors change when you tilt the notes. Remember, detecting genuine EC Polymer notes is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Feel, look, and tilt.
EC Polymer Notes. Cleaner, safer, stronger.
Welcome back to The Point. We're speaking with Minister of Education Emmalin Pierre and Deputy Chief Education Officer with responsibility for exam, Mrs. Michelle Peters-George. Ladies, let's look into the individual schools who have been performing and who have performed in the 2020 exams. Let's look deeper into who those schools are. Which schools are those?
So I'm going to ask Michelle to share with us that list, but before she does so, and while she finds it, Blossom, I really want to congratulate all of the schools, all the schools that scored average of 80% and over. And one of the exciting things for me about this year's results, and I've said so, some of the schools that actually feature in that group, sometimes you don't hear very much about them, and I really want to say a special congratulations, particularly to those schools. You may not hear 1 or 2 schools in that group as well. They did not score 80% and over. And I'll ask Michelle to share with them, particularly Grenada Christian Academy. They did not score 80% and above. But when you look at the percentage increase in performance, it is just as much an outstanding performance as scoring 80% and above. That part of the results actually excites me. So, Michelle, you may want to share that list. Remembering last year, it actually was only 8 schools scoring 80% and above.
Thank you very much, Minister. And you're absolutely correct. Only 8 schools in 2019 achieved 80% or above overall in terms of the percentage pass rate. This year, we have 17 of these schools obtaining 80% or above, and we're very much proud to mention these schools, including PAM. And PAM this year had 100% pass rate. We had Hillsborough Secondary, which 92.34%, St. Joseph's Convent, St. George's, Bishop's College, Westmoreland, Haberlight, and that's a private school in Carriacou, St. Joseph's Convent, Grenville, Grenville Secondary, Happy Hill Secondary, Grenada Seventh-day Adventist Comprehensive, Westerhall Secondary, MacDonald College, Grenada Christian Academy, St. David's Secondary, St. Mark's, that is, Secondary, St. Andrew's Anglican Secondary, Boca Secondary, and Presentation Brothers College. So these are the 17 schools who achieved that 80% or above mark. And we're, as Minister mentioned, we're very much proud of Grenada Christian Academy because they had marked improvement in performance. This year, not this year, but the improvement was 38.97% improvement. And I think that is something that we must commend. We must commend the teachers, we must commend the principals, we must commend the students and the principals for their efforts this year. The program for adolescent mothers, PAM, an improvement of 33.33%. Boca Secondary, 24.64% improvement. Happy Hill also jumped by 24.64%. And finally, Grenville Secondary with 14.57% movement upward. So we're very proud of these schools. As we say, sometimes you don't hear a lot about these schools. So we're really happy to highlight these schools, in particularly where we had this massive improvement in performance. So that's basically it in terms of the schools that we saw above the 80% mark, and also those we saw with marked improvement in performance.
Just one more thing to add, Lord. There are, well, there's not many more after 17, but we do have schools that didn't make the 80%, but were not far away from the 80%, very close, from 70s.
Very much so. There were a few schools that were very close, 79 points. So I think we performed very well this year, but as I always say to persons, I believe we can reach that 80% goal for every school, and I believe that we're definitely going to do so in the near future, hopefully next year starting.
And what about the percentage pass rates for the individual subjects? Which subjects have we seen improvement in? And, well, I know you mentioned geography with the one with the biggest decline, but tell me about the subject areas.
Right. In terms of improvement based on subject areas, we found the biggest jump upwards in the area of French. And we're very happy again to mention that because we've struggled with French a bit for a number of years. So it's really a pleasure to see the performance improve from 45.21% in 2019 to 66.17%. In 2018 as well, we had a performance of 47.64%. So I'm really happy to see what is happening with French here. We also saw significant improvement in religious education, a movement from 62.7% in 2019 to 80% in 2020, a 17.3% improvement. And thereafter, industrial technology, mechanical, and please be reminded that the only school writing the subject is Boca Secondary School. They moved from 83.33% to 100% this year. Only 11 students wrote the examination though. We must commend them because we know this subject is very much expensive to maintain, but they continue to press on, the only school in Grenada offering this subject. And thereafter, we had some other improvements. We had English B improving by 11.16%. All right, and a number of other subjects where we had improvements. Caribbean history had improvements. EDPM had improvements. English A had improvements. Family and resource management improved. Integrated science, Mathematics, of course, I'm always happy to mention about mathematics. Once it moves by 1%, I am happy because I know the struggles that we've had, but I'm happy to see the improvement this year. We had office administration, physical education and sport, principles of business improvement, social studies improvement, Spanish, technical drawing, textile, clothing, and fashion. And we also had an improvement in visual arts, additional mathematics, and finally, agricultural science. So these are the areas where we had improvement. In terms of decline, along with geography, we had another significant decline of 5.34% in information technology. But all other areas, basically, the majority of areas we saw improvement, the others just minor declines of probably 1%, they're about 2%, and so. Mm-hmm.
And grades, I've seen on social media there was one parent more or less bigging up her son for passing, I believe it was 16 or 18 subjects. I've seen commendations for students passing 14 and 15 subjects. Tell me who those outstanding students are, if you can remember them, that is, and maybe student that so far has the most passes or in most subjects.
Oh yes, we saw some outstanding performances this year. And I think this is the first time for Grenada, based on the time that I've been here in the examinations unit, the most number of subjects written by a Grenadian student is 18. And that was this year by Giovanni Digans, and he was able to pass all 18 subjects with 16 grade 1s, 1 grade 2, and 1 grade 3. We also had Sekou Sam from GBSS as well as Giovanni, and he wrote 16 subjects, got 16 passes, 13 grade 1, and two grade 2s, and 1 grade 3. Following was April Alexander, that's third from St. Joseph's Convent, 13 subjects, all 13 grade 1. She was successful in, right? But we had a number of students because sometimes while we focus on quantity, it's also good to focus on quality. But we had a number of students where we saw they wrote probably 10, 9 or so, and they got all with perfect grades. In other words, with grade 1s. And we must commend these persons for their performances, along with the top performers this year in the examination. We also want to commend some of the schools. We had St. Joseph's Convent, had a number of them as well there, GBSS, as I said. We had Hillsborough and so forth, Westmoreland and Anglican High School, and so with outstanding performances this year in the examination when you're talking about the number of grade 1s that their students achieved. PBC as well was there. So we must commend them, but I also want to focus as well on the students who probably would have done 5 and it was the best and they excelled at that 5 subject. They were able to pass all of these subjects. I think that you have also succeeded in the examination, and we must emphasize that as well. I must let you know that in all of the sciences, we performed as well above the region. In chemistry, the PO sciences, that is chemistry, physics, and biology, our performance was definitely above the region in all of these areas. However, I must let you know that while we had improvement in physics compared to last year, there were declines in slight decline, I must say, in chemistry and biology, but our performance is still above the regional average. In terms of English language, we saw a comparable performance with the region, with English A percentage pass rate being 82.65 compared to the region 82. However, it is a significant improvement of about 4% when compared to last year's performance. And of course, mathematics, we saw the 5% that we mentioned earlier, improvement.
All right. I just wanted to reiterate what you said about the students who sat 5 and 6 subjects and were successful. You were also successful, not because you didn't sit in the teens like some of the other students. Once you tried your best and you were able to pass most, if not all of them, you were successful. Keep that in mind. I just wanted to reiterate that part. All right. So let's move on from exams and get into the new school year. Blossom, like some members of the public, is concerned that we've given public transportation the go-ahead to transport their insurable numbers that is more or less full in the bus. I think it's 16 or 18 passengers. But at school, we still have the students staying 6 feet apart and so on and so forth. And my concern is the same students who jam up in the bus are the same students who we telling when you go in school, remember to stay 6 feet. Blossom is concerned about that. How would you, Mrs. George, or the Minister, respond to those concerns that I know some members of the public also have?
So let me respond by saying that as it relates to all, whether it pertains to schools, whether it pertains to buses, wherever, those are managed and sanctioned by the Cabinet of Grenada finally, but of course it comes through a process that involves our technical persons as it relates to health and persons on the COVID-19 committee and so on, the advice that you get as it relates to coming up with those regulations and those protocols. And there are different reasons why different things would be recommended at different times. So if we're to zero in on school, for example, of course, we don't say you can do 6 feet or you can do 3 feet, or we don't make that decision. We may make a proposal or a recommendation, and of course, that has to get approved, particularly after examined by the health officials and COVID-19 committee and so on. But when we presented the plan for the first 4 to 5 weeks of school opening, we were not just looking at the health aspect of it. Remember, we looked at the psychosocial aspect, in that you still had teachers who were uncomfortable with coming back to school. You still had parents who were uncomfortable with coming back, sending their children back to school. Even now, at this stage, while some people are very comfortable with removing the physical distancing, let us just go back to normal, it's time. We still have a few parents may not have sent their children back in September, because even with the 6 feet, they're still not comfortable, right? So there are a number of things that one has to consider when making that final decision. And I want to say that the first place of starting for us was to consider the psychosocial state of our students and our teachers. That is why we decided we are going to phase this thing in. Over a 1 month period, there are certain things that is priority, not the academics at that point. So the psychosocial assessments, the academic assessments, ensuring that we engage parents, all of those things, the distribution of the devices to start that process of facilitating blended learning and so on. So we phase that in. We have just really completed that first phase. And so now we're collecting all this data where Blossom and others are concerned. We should probably go back to normal. We collected all of that. So the feedback from the parents, the feedback from the union, the feedback from the teachers, principals, and so on, we've been in the data collection mode. And I always like to say, when you make a decision, you want to make an informed decision. We have seen many persons expressing that comfort that we are ready to go back to normal. We have seen some, we have still responding to teachers who are saying, we're not very comfortable with X or Y, and we are dealing with those on a case-by-case basis. We have X health issue. We don't feel comfortable coming back to school. We're dealing with those case by case. But let us remember that it is comfort plus. So you have the comfort one, but you also have the health concern. And if you ask me, Blossom, should we just immediately revert to our normal way? I would be extremely concerned. there would be justification for why this is a little wider than this. So why the people in the buses X and the people here cannot do Y. There would always be that concern, and there would always be different justification for such. And one of the other things I think is also important is that it is necessary to keep our students in a mode of preparedness. That's the other factor. Meaning that if we're to go totally back to normal, I think we would be dropping our guard even further. And so it means that if we have one case or two cases or a couple cases, then it means that it would be more difficult for students to transfer back to that mode. And guess what? We may just have to shut down schools again. So I'm looking at it from different perspectives. Yes, I understand the concern, but I'm also saying that it is not just that as an issue. We have to look at all the other factors in question. We did make some accommodation that was approved, which is schools are free to move from 6 feet to 3 feet, which means you would be able to accommodate far more students than you would have been able to in a classroom when it's 6 feet, so maybe close to twice as much. Now, it means, therefore, that the school has to be also comfortable. And we have had schools that said, no problem, we're ready, 3 feet. And you've had schools that said, look, let's take it slow. We're going to continue with our 6 feet because we want to make sure that we're not just dictating in terms of those areas, but we give the school some space. Your staff is comfortable, your parents are comfortable. Go forwards, 3 feet. Now, if that is further reduced, we would also give the option. The comfort, the mental state, the psychological state is also important. And that is why I personally, outside of all of the protocols, I don't promote and suggest a sudden rush because that can have other implications, other problems that maybe we might not be able to see physically, but might be very, very detrimental for children, even for teachers in the long run.
But Minister, you spoke of the protocols the buses need to pay attention to, but we have seen and know of the buses who are not adhering to all the protocols, particularly the sanitization and the wearing of masks. So I think that is where some of the major concern is, because while we're saying the children have their protocols to see after, the adults that they're around in the buses are not always adhering. I think that's where the major concern is.
And there's two things I'll say to that. One, as adults, we have to be careful and we have to provide example for children. We have to ensure that they can model what we do, because I think if anybody rides on a bus without a mask, they're being irresponsible. That's my honest opinion on this. You're exposing yourself unnecessarily. And then two, I would also say to that if 5 passengers said, when that bus stopped, sorry, I'm going to wait on the next bus. I'm not going on your bus because there are too many people on this bus without masks. I'm sure we're going to find bus drivers insisting, don't come on the bus unless you have a mask because you're losing me passengers. So I think it's a matter of people insisting, because if I go on a bus today, I will not sit if I'm not comfortable that the people around me are wearing a mask. And it's to protect them and it's to protect myself. So I want to make this appeal, as I've done before. Wearing the mask is really protection. People say, and I repeat that all the time, we don't have cases here, and I normally correct them. We do not have any known cases here, right? And I always like to add this. I come from a constituency where people complain to me. Minister, people are coming in from X, I don't want to call any country's name, from X and Y place with speedboats. They're not going through the port. They're not going through check. Nobody's checking their temperature. And I'll give one further example. In one of our classes at the constituency level, a couple of persons were calling me. We're not comfortable going to the class today because X, who just came from Y place, did not go through the port, was not checked. He's supposed to be in the class today. And you see how we can expose ourselves further if we don't do a basic thing as wearing a mask can go a very long way. And that's my encouragement.
At this point, we're going to open the platform for our viewers and listeners who may have comments, questions, queries, concerns for the Minister or Mrs. George. 435-2041, that's the landline number. You can also WhatsApp us. Please, only written messages on the WhatsApp. You can also pose your questions on the GBN Television Facebook page and the Grenada Broadcasting Network's YouTube channel. Let's go to our first caller. Good morning, caller.
Yeah, good morning to public servant Emmalin, Pierre. I'm just listening to you, and I'm not saying that you're downplaying the significance of what's going on. But I was talking to somebody this morning, and they were telling me about the situation with maths. They submitted maths, and it's ungraded. There's a lot of problems in the schools that probably might draw to your attention eventually. But there are a lot of problems in Grenada. Number two, the laptop that you someone MMP gives to the people on behalf of the government, of course the taxpayers. I understand that it's not working properly. I don't know if this allegation is true. Finally, in relation to paying for the laptop, I remember in the NDC time that they made a lot of fuss about the $50. Now, a lot of people are losing their jobs, and the government is insisting that they have to pay $50 and $1,000 for, you know what? That is taxpayers' money. You all had a situation where you had $70,000 for children's telephone bill. Why should we have to pay for that and pay for the laptop? And finally, I hear you saying all the time about the schools that they're refurbishing and costing the government a lot of money and the sanitizers and so, and you have to pay people. It's not a problem, but I want to just say, with due respect to you, it is the taxpayers' money. You're not doing us a favor, and we don't have to thank you. So all this thing I talk about government spending this, government spending and that is taxpayers' money.
All right, thank you.
All right, so let me respond. It is not all taxpayers' money. We do have in there some loans. So for example, you have the World Bank included in there. You have CDB, composition, grant loans. And the smallest composition of that in terms of figures would be local funds, the smallest composition of that total sum. And I normally refer to 2021, 2022 early part of $50 million. Very small part of that local funds. And so I have to say this, that even if we speak about this and the importance, the sacrifice, it is. And I'll tell you another reason why it is, because you would hear in some sectors, we do have to make some cuts. So it is a sacrifice that is being made to make those funds available, because there are many other important areas that are being cut at this time, but we are valuing the importance of doing these repairs, even in these challenging times. So we could say, let us put this on hold, and let us do something else at this time and continue with repairs at a later time. But the decision was taken, wise decision, I believe, to do so. We could have said, let us wait until we get back to the point where we can afford, easily so, to provide the supplies just for this storm. As I said, $2 million. It is not monies that were available. The Ministry of Education had zero in terms of allocation for the return of schools as it relates to supply. This is not something that was ever budgeted for. And so we had to rely on support from the Ministry of Finance to be able to source these additional funds. Now, as it relates to $50 and $1,000, I don't know anything about $1,000. I have absolutely no clue. This is not a program of the Ministry of Education where anybody has to pay $1,000. There's only one figure or two figures that applies, $25 or $50. $50 for those persons who have never been part of the book program, $25 for those who have been part of the book program because they've already paid $25. Now, the other thing with regards to the issue of mathematics and downplaying, now, if the caller joined from the start, she would have heard us say from the preliminary assessment of the results and from initial premature conversation with principals, there isn't anything that flags a major concern. The head of the unit said, one school drew reference to mathematics, right? And we've had 3 students with other subject areas. And we also said that it is very early to speak anything scientific or anything from data because you could only work with what you have at this stage. Now we have up to October for every school to drill down student by student, teacher by teacher, subject area by subject area. And until that is done, until school A or teacher A or parent A comes forward to say, my son, based on their performance, should have gotten this because of this evidence, because of this observation, then there's absolutely nothing that the Ministry of Education can speak to except the raw data that is before us, right? So only the teacher, the parent, and the principal will know what the caller was just referring to. And they now have to come to the Ministry of Education to bring forward that, entering it on an online system as well, and then CXC is alerted of that. So there's a process, and you just can't jump up and say, well, maths is bad or maths is this, because what you have before you says something different, except we go school by school, student by student, and that process is on currently, and legitimately so. We do have until middle or just close to the end of October to bring all of those queries in a professional manner to the relevant authority. So what do you say outside of that, right? So we will say when we have collected all of the information from the appropriate persons. As it relates to the devices, I can speak generally to the feedback that we have been receiving. Remember, we are in the phase of distribution. We are in the phase of distribution that is followed by the appointment of persons at the school level who are named junior e-champions, meaning there is a query. So right now at this stage, if there's a query, a person deals directly with the Ministry of Education. We've engaged a number of persons who would now be assigned to the schools as junior e-champions, and they would be able to deal with one-on-one students and teachers if there is any issue. In addition to that, the ministry would also be assigning senior e-champions at the school. Those would be at the level of teachers who would now be managing and guiding and leading the e-learning platform and process at the school. Now, what has been the general review thus far? Generally speaking, we have had very good reviews from our parents, very good reviews from our teachers and principals. Now, if there's a particular case, there's an outline process that that case is dealt with, and there are systems in place for absolutely any issue that is raised surrounding this particular matter. But the reality is that we are very impressed and satisfied thus far with the process. And I do want to thank all of those who have been involved, making it the success it has been thus far and addressing all of the issues that comes with such a program of such a project of such magnitude.
A quick question, quickly. While the students have the devices that is being provided, there are still situations where students are required to get cell phones because work is still being issued on WhatsApp, which some parents have complained is putting them in additional financial stress in these COVIDious times. Is it a matter of encouraging the teachers to continue using the programs that are on the tablet, or it's a case of by any means necessary get the work to the students?
So I would say WhatsApp was actually on one of our listings of options for teaching, I remember in March when all of this started. And that was because at the time, we felt that if you needed to communicate, one of the easiest way to do so in the middle of just shutting down schools was to reach parents and students that way. Most teachers have moved from that. Most teachers have moved from that. Why? At the secondary school level, for example, I believe most of our students by now, this week is actually the last week for secondary school students, and most persons would now have the device that they can communicate with. So in a case where a WhatsApp is being used, I would say it's probably where there is no other means of doing so. It should not be the main means of communicating with parents and teachers. I would trust that it's probably a case where it's the only thing available. We've also distributed devices now to all of our secondary school teachers, and we're moving into the next phase of our primary school teachers. But mindful, Blossom, that remember we said those first 4 weeks, at least maximum 5 weeks, there are those elements, those pillars, those things that does not have teaching and learning as the top priority. So schools should now be moving gradually into that process of going to the regular timetabling and so on. So I would imagine as they settle in, as they get moving, we would see a change there as well.
Okay, let me see how many are. Ooh, we've quickly run out of time, but there are questions that I feel like I need to ask. There's a question on Facebook that is asking about T.A. Marisho Community College on the sister Isle of Carriacou. How soon can work be done? That's the short of the question.
So the short of the answer is that we're not able to do all schools at the same time. So we have 75 schools budgeted for on the different sources of funds. T.A. Marisho School in TAMCC campus in Carriacou has been identified, not in that 75, but there's another program where we've identified some possible funding, and we're looking at how we can quickly move that process forward. But mind you, some of the schools in that 75 that is taking place now, remember, the procedures, the processes, the World Bank, CDB, sometimes those processes can take an entire year. And so it doesn't mean that because a school is being repaired today, that the process of getting there started yesterday. And so we're in the process of working towards TAMCC, the identification and processing as it relates to funding, because it is a major project as well.
Okay, a WhatsApp question. Recently, the ministry made known public that they are in the need of teachers in secondary and primary schools. Can you highlight which subject areas the teachers are needed for?
It's a variety of subject areas. It would be difficult to name them now. And I just want to remind persons that whenever there is a need, it is because somebody has either gone off to study, somebody went on short leave, or somebody retired. So particularly at the secondary school level, when you're replacing, it means that it's not anybody who applies, but you're replacing based on a particular subject need. And it's something I realize the public doesn't fully understand. So what I suggest that person can do is to communicate with the Ministry of Education to find out where, or some people go directly to the schools in the area. That's another route. Maybe I'll encourage that route. You can submit an application. Once there's a vacancy, what we do is look at that pool of what do we have. But I must say, Blossom, we struggle sometimes, and I want to make reference to technical areas and the science. I think those are the two areas where we normally struggle in terms of application and interest. I'll encourage persons in the technical areas. If you have an interest in teaching, don't wait for a vacancy to announce. There's a pool of application. The process of interviewing starts even before there's a need. Submit the application, and I give you the assurance that you will be coming in.
Would you say online classes was a success based on the results that we got from CSEC and CAPE? And do you see it as a way in the future post-COVID, whenever post-COVID is?
So I know, right? As you mentioned, CAPE, let me just stick this one in to say, Blossom, that we did have some challenges with CAPE, meaning that some students, their report came back as ungraded. And I did announce yesterday that that has been rectified. Those were uploaded after the CXC deadline and several deadlines, and CXC has agreed. And they have provided a special folder for uploading of those students' scores, the SPA scores. CXC have received those, and they are processing and going to be getting back to students with their results soon. So I just thought I should stick that in. As it relates to online learning, the blended approach, which is what we call, that caller, that person, I believe, is seeing ahead. Because if you check what's happening, universities, schools across the world, I mean, it is the direction that the world is going. And what you would find in terms of quality resources, in terms of quality material, more and more online teaching and learning will become an asset. Now, there are some teachers in the initial training that we have been doing are actually saying that they never viewed learning in that way. So our view is not that you get rid of face-to-face. I mean, who knows where the world is going? You never know where it may eventually lead, right? But the face-to-face is absolutely necessary and important for us at this time. And we encourage every school to try to ensure that students get as many days of face-to-face as possible, right? Because we don't manage that at the Ministry of Education. The school decide how many days per child. So we encourage as many days as possible. But the online learning becomes very critical where a child cannot get the 5 days at this time. And I just really want to say that I do believe that the online learning did help and did contribute. Remember, the students were home from March, and I know for a fact, even some of our private schools, I know they were using the MSTER platform, they were using the app, they were using programs that the teachers were loading online. And I believe the work that was done there contributed as well to their success in the exam. I just want to recognize how quickly many of our teachers adapted and put into the online learning, because remember, many of them did not do that before. And they would have been able to respond with support from the team, from the Ministry of Education, facilitating the training and so on. And again, the training was actually led by teachers. So the ministry engaged about 6 teachers, and they were actually engaged with the Ministry of Education to lead the training, which I also think made a difference and will make a significant difference as we go forward.
And finally, quickly, Minister, how many more schools and or students need to get devices, or how many more we still have to distribute? And that preludes the question here that someone has on WhatsApp about her child. Her child has not received their device as yet, but the teachers are still given work online. So how are we working around that in the time before the devices are distributed to those who don't have at the moment?
So that has been the case since March. We have had students who did not have a device, but the teachers had no choice. If the child is home, they must provide the resources online. And we literally had to speak with certain parents and say to them, try to make that a priority, because you actually had parents who were refusing to allow their children to use their personal device, right? And we have had a lot of cooperation from parents in that regard. So you know that the device is a problem. We probably only have one, and we put systems in place to deal with that. We started with the secondary school. Any secondary school student who did not receive the device after this week, it could be 2 reasons, basically. Reason one, that parent would have missed the day at the school, and the school would inform them what is a special arrangement that can be made for them. So maybe they did not get the message for the first day at the school. And the second reason can be that there would have been an error with the list of students submitted from the school to the Ministry of Education. And if you're submitting hundreds of names, there's a possibility that one name could be left out as an error. And so once we identify an error, it's corrected immediately. The team goes into addressing that particular problem. So by the end of this week, I would say latest, the first half of next week, every secondary school student have had an opportunity to receive the device, right? Once we completed with that, we are moving into the primary school teachers. Remember, we started with secondary school teachers, then secondary school student, then we move to primary school teachers, and then we intend to start the primary school students, right? So I hope I answered the question.
Hopefully. Thank you very much, Madam Minister, Mrs. George. Thank you both for being our guests this morning. I robbed some of Janelle's time, but I think it's important we got out the information that we did. So thank you both and have yourselves a productive Wednesday.
Thank you to Blossom for the opportunity.
Thank you. Have a good one. That was Minister of Education Emmalin Pierre and Deputy Chief Education Officer with responsibility for exams Michelle Peters-George. We thank them both for being our guests this morning, and thank you, our viewers and listeners, for tuning into the program. That's the end of my time today. I've already robbed some of Janelle's time on Mid-Morning Buzz. She's up next, and she's going to take you up until midday. Have yourselves a safe, productive Wednesday. I'll be back with you tomorrow, God willing. Bye-bye.